When we work at applying restorative justice to historic or systemic injustices, these are the 9 issues, and there may be more. These are the 9 that I have come up with. 1, we need to do a power analysis. We have to look at how power, and I'm speaking now, social power, is distributed in our communities and society. Who has access to jobs, education, decision-making? We have to wrestle with how power is distributed in order to work at applying restorative justice to systemic injustices. 2, we need to look at the spiral of violence. Where in the community are the chronic places of violence, and why do they persist? Where is it happening in the community? Why is it happening in the community? And how can we address that so that violence does not persist in those chronic places? 3, that victims and survivors, they need to be identified, listened to, and organized. 4, historical revisitation and truth-telling. It is so very hard for the dominant culture to hear marginalized people's stories. A less, space for that story and a safe space for that story, even if we try as dominant culture people to create a safe space, we need to ask, what does that safe space look like? Who is going to create that safe space for marginalized people to tell their story? Because it is not, again, it is not the dominant culture that is going to be able to create that space. It is a space that we can get behind and try to help create and put our resources towards, but it is the marginalized community that will determine if it is a safe space to tell their story. 5, there needs to be public acknowledgement of people's pain. The South Africa TRC taught us that people could not move past the horrors of apartheid until they moved through them. There were 22,000 victims that spoke in the South Africa TRC and 7,000 perpetrators that came forward. But that stories from South Africa and now stories from around the world of people, again, victims telling their story publicly, and the recognition of the larger community recognizing their pain, and the truth of that story is also central to restorative justice. Accountability of perpetrating persons and institutions. We can't just cluck our tongues and say what a pity that was, and not look at how can we change this, who was responsible, and what needs to be changed in our community, which takes us to political and structural change. This exercise in historical truth-telling must lead to real change. 8, reparations. And again, this gets very, very difficult, but there needs to be some sort of compensation for the pain, the suffering, the violations. And when I say that, reparations, just like in a victim-offender mediation, when we take it down to that interpersonal, when there is one victim, one offender, and their support people, an interpersonal situation, all the way to a political situation like that, reparations is always symbolic, right? It can never undo what has been done, and it can never completely take away all of that pain, but it is a very necessary part, whether that be money, land given back, monuments, some recognition of the pain and the violation recognized. The last thing would be recovenanting. How can we envision and commit to a new future? Philosopher Santayana says, "Those who do not remember history are doomed to repeat it." Ultimately, I think for restorative justice to succeed in addressing these larger issues of systemic injustice, it needs people willing to exercise moral imagination and political courage.